The neglected widow who shared her last meal and became the village queen mother, a story from Ugwoba, Enugu State. Adanna, the woman. Nobody remembered Adanna did not always live the way she was living now. There was a time when her compound was full of noise, children running, the smell of fresh pepper soup coming from her kitchen, her husband Chukwemeka calling her name from the door. But that time was gone. It had been gone for 3 years. She lived in a small mud house at the edge of Ugwoba, a quiet village in Enugu State. The house sat close to the bush, far from the main road where traders passed and women gathered to gossip in the evenings. Nobody came to Adanna's side of the village unless they had a reason, and most people never had a reason. Her husband had died from a sickness that the hospital in Enugu town could not explain. He went in walking and never came out. That was 3 years ago. After that, the people who called themselves friends stopped coming. Her in-laws, the Enwabodo family, told her she had to leave the main compound because she had no son. She had 2 daughters, Chisom and Obiageli, both under 10 years old. The family said a woman with no son had no right to inherit the land. So Adanna packed the few things she had and moved to the edge of the village. She did not cry in front of anyone. She cried at night, quietly, so her daughters would not hear. She found work where she could. She fetched firewood and sold it. She planted cassava on a small piece of land that belonged to nobody. She washed clothes for Mama Ifeanyi, the wife of the town union chairman, on some weekends. It was not much, but it kept her children in school. The village of Ugwoba had a way of forgetting people who were no longer useful to them. Adanna had learned this the hard way. When Chukwemeka was alive, they were invited to every ceremony. People greeted her with respect. Now she walked through the village market and women turned away, not with anger, just with nothing, like she was not there. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who do not see you. Adanna lived inside that loneliness every day. The year the rain refused to fall, the Harmattan that year in Enugu State came early and stayed too long. By February, the dry wind had cracked the earth and turned the leaves brown. The cassava that Adanna had planted began to shrink in the ground. The stream that women used for washing ran thin. And by March, it was clear to everyone in Ugwoba that the harvest would be small. People began to feel the pressure. Traders in the Oguta Road Market raised their prices. A cup of gari that used to cost 50 naira now costs 120. Palm oil became scarce. Meat disappeared from most cooking pots. Even the families with money began to be careful. For Adanna, there was no care. There was nothing to be careful with. She dug up what cassava had survived and pounded it herself. She mixed it with the little egusi she had saved from the previous season and cooked a thin soup. She made sure Chisom and Obiageli ate first. Whatever was left, she ate. On the days there was nothing left, she drank water and told her daughters she was not hungry. One Thursday morning, Adanna woke up very early before the cocks crowed and counted what she had. It was not much. There was a handful of dried crayfish wrapped in old newspaper. There was a small amount of ofe onugbu leaves drying on a line near the window. There were 3 pieces of stockfish that she had been saving for weeks. And there was about 1.5 cups of palm oil in a small container. She decided she would make a proper meal that day, not because things were better, but because her daughters had not eaten a real meal in many days. She would cook ofe onugbu with the stockfish and egusi with enough fufu to fill them properly. After that meal, she did not know what would happen, but at least that day her children would eat well. She lit the firewood and began to cook. She did not know that before the meal would be ready, a stranger would knock on her door, and that stranger would change everything. The old man at the door, the knock came around midday. It was not a loud knock. It was the kind of knock that came from someone who was not sure they were welcome. Adanna wiped her hands on her wrapper and went to the door. She opened it and saw an old man standing outside. He was very old. His face had the lines of someone who had lived through many hard things. His clothes were clean but worn thin. He was carrying a small bag made of jute. His sandals were broken at the strap, and he had tied them together with a thin strip of rubber. She did not know him. He was not from Ugwoba. "My daughter," he said. His voice was deep and slow, like a man who had learned that words should not be wasted. "I have been walking since morning. I am going to Agbani, but I took the wrong road, and now I am very tired, and the sun is too much. I am asking only for water, nothing else." Adanna looked at him. She could see he was more than just tired. His lips were dry. His eyes had that sunken look that came from not eating for a long time. She opened the door wider. "Come inside," she said. He sat on the wooden bench near the wall. She brought him water in a cup, and he drank all of it slowly. She brought more. He drank that too. Then the smell from her pot reached the room. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, not meaning to, but Adanna saw it. She understood what that look meant. She'd made that same face herself on the days when she smelled other people's food cooking. She went back to her kitchen and looked at the pot. She thought about her daughters coming home from school. She thought about how this meal was supposed to carry them through. She thought about how there was nothing else in the house after this. Then she thought about the old man's broken sandals. She took out 2 of the 3 pieces of stockfish and added them back to the pot. She scooped a good portion of the soup into a separate bowl. She pounded enough fufu for a full meal. Then she carried it to the old man. "Eat," she said. "The road to Agbani is still long." The old man looked at the food. Then he looked at her. "My daughter," he said quietly. "Are you sure?" "Eat," she said again, and went back to her kitchen. She heard the sounds of him eating. She stood in the kitchen and held herself together. When he finished, he called her. She came out and he looked at her with eyes that saw more than most people's eyes. "What is your name?" he asked. "Adanna," she said. "Adanna Nwobodo." "And your husband?" "He has gone," she said simply. The old man nodded slowly. He sat quietly for a moment, then he said something she did not expect. "I will remember this," he said. "A person who gives from nothing gives more than someone who gives from plenty. I will remember this." He picked up his jute bag, fixed his broken sandal as best he could, and walked away down the road. Adanna watched him until he disappeared around the bend. Then she went inside and finished cooking what was left for her children. She did not think about the old man again. She had too many other things to think about. The things that come without warning. 3 weeks passed, then 1 month. The rains still refused to come to Enugu State in the way they were supposed to. Adanna continued her life the way she always had. She woke before her children. She worked, she fed them, she slept last. Chisholm, her older daughter, was 11 now. She had started to understand things. She had started to notice that her mother did not always eat. One evening, she came to Adanna and said, "Mama, you did not eat again." Adanna pulled her daughter close and held her. "I ate a little," she said. It was only half true. "I want to help," Chisholm said. "When I finish school, I will work and give you everything." "Oh, I know you will," Adanna said. "I know." Little Obiageli, who was 8, did not understand all of it, but she felt something. She'd become quiet in a way that young children should not be quiet. She drew pictures on the back of old school papers. Many of her drawings were of a family eating at a table, a mother, a father, 2 girls, always the same drawing. Adanna kept those drawings. She folded them carefully and put them inside her Bible. One afternoon, a man came to the village. He arrived in a car that raised red dust on the unpaved road. The car was not flashy, but it was clean. The man who stepped out of it was wearing simple clothes. He was maybe 60 years old. He had a calm face. He was accompanied by 2 younger men who carried notebooks. Nobody knew who he was. He walked through the village greeting people. He stopped at the community borehole. He looked at the primary school building, which had a roof with holes in it. He spoke to the village women who were selling in the small market square. Adanna saw all of this from a distance. She was carrying firewood on her head, returning from the bush. She did not pay the man much attention. Strangers came to villages sometimes. They asked questions and left. Nothing changed. But that evening, one of the younger men who came with the stranger knocked on her door. She opened it carefully. "Good evening, Ma," the young man said. "Are you Adanna Nwobodo?" She went very still. "Yes," she said. "Chief Odumegwu would like to speak with you tomorrow morning. He will send the car." Chief Odumegwu? She did not know that name. "Yes, Ma, he is the new Igwe of Ugwoba. He was installed last month in Enugu. He came today to see the village for the first time." Adanna blinked. She had heard that a new Igwe had been chosen for Ugwoba after years without one. But she had not gone to the installation ceremony in Enugu because she had no money for transport and no good clothes to wear. "What does he want with me?" she asked. The young man smiled politely. "He said to tell you that he owes you a meal." Adanna stood at her door for a long time after the young man left. She replayed the words, "He owes you a meal." Then it came to her, slowly, like light coming under a door. The old man, the broken sandals, the jute bag, the way he had looked at her with those deep eyes. Her hand went to her mouth. The morning that changed the direction of everything, she did not sleep well that night. Not because she was excited, though there was some of that, but because she did not trust it. She had learned not to trust good things. Good things in her life had a way of arriving and then leaving again, sometimes leaving worse damage than before. She told herself to be calm, to go and hear what the man wanted, to not build anything in her mind before she got there. She was good at controlling her hopes. She had practiced it for 3 years. She woke up early, bathed herself and her daughters, dressed them in their school uniforms, and walked them to the school gate before the car came. Then she went home and changed into her best wrapper. It was not new, but she folded and tied it neatly. She oiled her skin and combed her hair. The car came at exactly 9 in the morning. She was taken to a compound on the other side of the village. It was the kind of compound that had been properly maintained. The walls were freshly painted. There were flowers planted near the entrance. Women were sweeping the courtyard. She was led to a sitting room and asked to wait. The room had proper chairs, a rug on the floor, photographs on the wall. She sat up straight and kept her hands in her lap. Then Chief Odumegwu walked in. When she saw his face, she knew, even without the title, even dressed now in proper clothes, she knew those eyes. Those were the eyes of the old man who had eaten at her table. He sat across from her and looked at her for a moment. Then he spoke. "You did not know who I was," he said. "No," she answered. "And if you had known?" She thought about it honestly. "I do not think it would have changed anything. Your sandal was broken. You were hungry." He nodded slowly, the same way she remembered from that day at her door. "I was traveling on that road on purpose," he said. "I just returned from Enugu after being told I would become the new Igwe of this village. I had not been back to Ugwoba in 23 years. I wanted to walk through it quietly before anyone knew. I wanted to see what the village was really like, not the face it would show me as Igwe." He paused. "I ate at 3 houses that day before I reached yours. At the first 2, I was given water and told they had nothing. I could see through the windows that there was food cooking. At the 3rd house, a woman brought me a small biscuit and told me to continue my journey." "And at my house?" Adanna asked quietly. "At your house," he said. "A woman who had almost nothing divided what little she had and gave it freely. And when I asked if she was sure, she said, 'Eat, the road is still long.'" He was quiet for a moment. "I saw your kitchen when I left. I saw the pot. I understood." Adanna looked at her hands. "I asked around about you after," he continued. "I heard about your husband. I heard what the family did to you. I heard how you have been living." She kept looking at her hands. She was not going to cry in front of this man. She was not. "I have a responsibility to this village," Chief Odumegwu said. "Not just to build roads or fix schools, though I will do those things, but to set the right example. A village is only as good as the values it keeps alive." He leaned forward. "I want to appoint you as the Ugoezi of Ugwoba, the queen mother of this village. It is not just a title, it is a role. You will work with the Women's Council. You will help manage the welfare fund I am setting up for widows and orphans. You will be a voice in the decisions of this community. The room was completely quiet. Adanna slowly raised her head and looked at him. Why me? She asked. There are older women in this village, women from bigger families. Because, he said simply, a title means nothing if the person wearing it does not know what it costs to be human. You know, I saw it. The village reacts. The news spread through Ugwoba, the way fire spreads through dry grass. By evening, everybody knew. By the next morning, people were talking about nothing else. The reactions were not all kind. There were women from the older families who felt the title should have gone to someone with more standing. Mama Chinyere, whose husband had been a councillor, told her friends it was an insult. That woman has been sweeping other people's compounds, she said. Now they want to make her queen mother. Others were confused. They had walked past Adanna for 3 years without seeing her. Now they were being told she was important. The Nwabodo family, the same people who had pushed Adanna out of her husband's compound, sent a representative to Chief Odumegwu. The man arrived with a bottle of schnapps and tried to explain that Adanna was a simple woman who might not be able to handle such responsibilities. The chief thanked him for coming and asked him to leave. But there were also people in the village who had quietly watched Adanna all these years. They had seen her carry firewood. They had seen her walk her children to school in the rain. They had seen her sit in the back of the church every Sunday without complaint. These people said nothing loudly, but in their hearts, they felt that something right was happening. Adanna herself was not paying attention to most of it. She had a bigger problem. She did not have clothes for the installation ceremony. Chief Odumegwu had set a date 2 weeks away. There would be guests from Enugu town, from Augu, from Oji River. There would be photos. There would be speeches. She had nothing to wear that was right for such an occasion. She sat at home on a Thursday evening trying to figure out what to do when she heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find 3 women standing outside. She recognized them. They were from the Catholic Women's Organization at St. Peter's Parish. She had seen them at church, but they had never spoken to her directly. The one in front, a large woman named Mama Neka, was holding a bag. We heard, she said. We came to help. Adanna stood at the door, not knowing what to say. Let us in, Mama Neka said gently. There is much to do. They came in and opened the bag. Inside was fabric. Beautiful Ankara fabric in deep green and gold, which are the colors of Ugwoba. There was also a head tee folded carefully, and at the bottom of the bag, a pair of good leather sandals. We collected contributions, Mama Neka explained. 37 women from the parish. Some gave 200 naira. Some gave 500. One woman gave 1,000. It was enough. Adanna sat down slowly on her bench. She looked at the fabric in her hands. Something cracked open inside her quietly, and all the things she had held in for 3 years came flooding up to her eyes. She did not stop it this time. She let herself cry, and the 3 women sat with her in the small house and did not say anything for a while, because sometimes that is the right thing to do. The day of the installation. The day came with good weather. The Harmattan had finally begun to pull back, and there was a softness in the air that Ugwoba had not felt in months. By 7 in the morning, people were already setting up chairs in the village square. A canopy had been erected. Speakers were being tested. Women were cooking in large pots behind the community hall. Adanna, dressed in the compound of Mama Neka, who had offered her house for preparation. 4 women helped her tie her wrapper and head tee. Someone brought coal for her eyes. Someone else brought coral beads that had belonged to her grandmother. When they were done, she looked in the small mirror they held up for her. She almost did not recognize herself, not because she looked different, but because the woman in the mirror was standing straight. Chisholm and Obiageli were dressed in matching outfits that the women had also arranged. Chisholm, who was old enough to understand most of what was happening, was very serious all morning. She helped her younger sister braid her hair and kept saying, "Stand still, Obi, stand still." Obiageli kept wiggling and asking if there would be food at the ceremony. Adanna laughed when she heard that. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep. The ceremony began at 10 in the morning. Chief Odumegwu arrived in a procession with his cabinet and elders. He was dressed in the white and gold of the Igwe. The village masquerades performed at the entrance. The church choir from St. Peter's sang praise songs. When it was time for Adanna's installation, an elder came forward and called her name. The whole square went quiet. She walked forward with her daughters behind her. She walked at a steady pace. She did not look left or right. She looked straight ahead. The kola nut was broken. Prayers were said. The beads of the Ugweze were placed around her neck by the oldest woman in the village, a 91-year-old woman named Mama Ezinwa, who had been brought from her house specifically for this moment. Mama Ezinwa placed the beads with shaking hands and said only one thing: "Carry it well, my daughter." "I will," Adanna said. The crowd erupted. Even Mama Chinyere, who had spoken against the appointment, sat in her chair with a complicated look on her face. There was something in the way Adanna stood, something in the way the whole village had come together in that moment that was hard to argue with. Chisum was crying. She was trying not to, but she was. Obiageli looked around at the noise and the crowd and said loudly, "Is it now we eat?" People close enough to hear her burst into laughter. Even Chief Odumegwu smiled from his seat. The work begins. The title was not an end, it was the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Adanna threw herself into the work with the same energy she'd used to survive. But now the energy had direction. Now it has support. Chief Odumegwu had set up a welfare fund of 2 million naira for widows and vulnerable families in Ugwoba. Adanna was made the head of the committee that would manage it. She worked with 4 other women, including Mama Neka from the parish, to identify families who needed help and to set up a system for distributing support. She also started a small program she called Ulo Erne, which means Mother's House, and it was a weekly gathering where widows and single mothers in the village could come together, share their problems, and find practical solutions. Sometimes they pooled their resources to buy food in bulk, and sometimes a woman with a skill taught others. One woman who knew tailoring taught 5 others to sew. Another who made soap began to teach a class of 8. Adanna was good at this work. She was good at it because she had lived the problems she was trying to solve. When a widow came to her, ashamed and thin and looking at the floor, Adanna did not give speeches. She brought the woman water. She sat with her. She told her without many words that she had been there too, that it was possible to come through. She also confronted some things that were not easy. One of the first big issues she raised with Chief Odumegwu was the question of widows being removed from their husband's property. It had happened to her. It was still happening to others. She brought 3 cases to the chief's attention. In 2 of them, the families involved agreed to return the property when the chief intervened. In the 3rd case, the matter went to the Enugu State Customary Court, where the widow eventually won back her land. This made some powerful people in the village uncomfortable. They said Adanna was stirring up trouble. They said she was putting ideas in women's heads. They said a queen mother was supposed to be ceremonial, not a troublemaker. Adanna heard all of it, and she continued, because she knew what it felt like to be removed from your own home while your children watched. She knew what it felt like to sleep in a house at the edge of a village that nobody visited. She knew what it felt like to count crayfish and stockfish in the middle of the night. She was not going to stop because someone was uncomfortable. The wound that would not stay closed. There was one thing that Adanna did not talk about in public. One thing that sat at the back of her chest and pressed sometimes when she was alone. Her husband's family. The Norbodo family had never apologized. Not one of them. Not even after her installation as Ugweze. They walked through the village market and they saw her in her title and they said nothing. A few of the younger ones nodded their heads in greeting. The older ones looked away. Her mother-in-law, a woman named Lolo Norbodo, was still alive. She was old now and not well, but she'd been the one who told Adanna to pack her things after Chukwuemeka died. She had been the one who said in front of witnesses that a woman with no son was not a real wife. One afternoon, about 6 months after the installation, Adanna heard that Lolo Nwobodo had fallen ill, serious illness. The old woman was bedridden and her own children were scattered. One was in Lagos, one was in Port Harcourt, the third was somewhere in Imo State. None of them had come home. Adanna heard this from Mama Neka, who told her the way you tell someone information when you want to see what they will do with it. Adanna sat with this news for 2 days. She thought about the night she had packed her things from that compound. She thought about Chisholm, who was only 8 then, crying and asking why they were leaving. She thought about Obiageli, who was 5 and too young to understand, but old enough to be afraid. On the 3rd day, she cooked a pot of ofe oha with cocoyam, enough for several meals. She wrapped it carefully. She took it to the Nwobodo compound. Lolo Nwobodo's door was opened by a neighbor woman who was checking on the old lady. The neighbor stepped back when she saw Adanna standing there with the pot. Adanna walked in and set the food on the table. She looked at the old woman on the bed. Lolo Nwobodo looked back at her. The old woman's eyes were red and cloudy with age and sickness. There was fear in them and something else, something that looked like it had been sitting there a long time, waiting for a chance to come out. I did not come to fight, Adanna said quietly. I came because you are sick and there is no one here. The old woman opened her mouth. I closed it. Then she said something so quietly that Adanna had to lean forward to hear. I am sorry, she said. What I did to you was not good. Adanna looked at her for a long moment. Eat the food, she said. I will come again tomorrow. She came again the next day and the day after. She brought soup and firewood and medicine she bought from the chemist in Oji Road. She arranged for a young woman to stay with Lolo Nwobodo through the nights. People in the village could not believe what they were seeing. The woman who had been driven out was now the one keeping the old woman alive. Adanna did not do it for the village to see. She did it because she understood something that is very hard to hold on to when you are hurting. She understood that bitterness is heavy, and she had carried enough heavy things in her life. The rains came back. The rains came back to Ugwoba the following season. They came properly, the way rains in Enugu State are supposed to come. Not too much at once, not too little. They came in long, steady falls that soaked the earth and brought up the green. The cassava farms filled out. The rivers ran clear. The market stalls got restocked. The village felt different in a way that was hard to explain but easy to feel. Part of it was practical. The welfare fund had helped 38 families through the worst months. The Uloan program had grown to 70 women. 3 new businesses had been started by women who had learned skills through the program. The school roof had been repaired with money that Chief Odumegwu's administration had raised. The borehole had been cleaned. But there was something beyond the practical things. There was a change in how people looked at each other. When Mama Chinyere's daughter-in-law had a difficult childbirth and the family needed help, it was the women of Ulone who came with food and to sit with the family. Mama Chinyere herself went to Adanna afterward and said stiffly but sincerely, "You have done a good thing here." It was the closest thing to an apology she was capable of giving. Adanna received it that way. Chisholm, now 12, had joined a reading group that one of the Ulone women had started for children. She was reading books she had never had access to before. She was learning things that excited her. She came home one evening and told her mother she wanted to be a lawyer. "So that you can fight for widows like the court case you told me about?" Adanna asked. "Yes," Chisholm said seriously. "Exactly that." Adanna touched her daughter's face. "Then you will be," she said. Obiageli, who was 9 now and always hungry, had started drawing different pictures. She still drew families at tables, but now the tables were full of food and there were many people around them, not just 4. Adanna kept these pictures too. What the village learned. A year after Adanna became Ugoizi of Ugwoba, there was a gathering at the community hall. It was not a formal ceremony. Chief Odumegwu had organized it as a village reflection meeting. People came from all over Ugwoba to sit together and talk about where they were and where they wanted to go. At some point during the meeting, an elder named Mazio Keke stood up. He was one of the oldest men in Ugwoba, a man who did not speak often, but whose words, when he gave them, people listened to. "There is something I want to say," he began, "and it is not comfortable, but it is true." The room was quiet. This village allowed a woman to suffer for 3 years in plain sight. We walked past her. We did not greet her. We let her live at the edge of our village like someone who did not belong to us. And she was feeding her children with one hand and was still able to give from that same hand to a stranger. He paused. What that tells us is not just about Adanna. It tells us about ourselves. It tells us what we have become. A village that forgets its women who are struggling has forgotten something important about what it means to be a community. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Then Adanna, who was sitting to the side, said something. She spoke simply, in the way she always spoke. "I did not share that meal because I was strong," she said. "I shared it because I was tired of living small. I was tired of shrinking. That man at my door reminded me that even when you have very little, you still have a choice about who you are." She looked around the room. "The only thing I want from this village is for us not to forget the next woman who is living at the edge. Because she is there. She is always there. And she should not have to wait for a chief to see her before we see her." The room was still. Then Mama Nika started clapping slowly. Others joined. In a few moments, the whole hall was clapping. It was not the kind of clapping that happens when someone says something clever. It was the kind that happens when something true has been said and the people in the room feel it in their bodies. The woman at the edge of the village, 2 years after her installation, Adanna, was still living in the same small house at the edge of Ugwoba. Chief Odumegwu had offered her a larger house. Several families had offered land and accommodation. She thanked them all and stayed where she was. People found this strange. They asked her why. She told them, "If I move to the center of the village, I stop being close to where the people who need help actually are. The women who come to Ulone, most of them live on this side of the village. They come to me because I am near, because they do not have to walk far or prepare themselves to enter a place that looks too important. I want to stay reachable." And so she stayed. But the house itself had changed. Chief Odumegwu had arranged for it to be properly repaired. The roof no longer leaked. The walls had been reinforced and painted. There was a small veranda now where Adanna sometimes sat in the evenings with a cup of tea, watching the light fall on the cassava farm she still kept. She still grew cassava, even though she no longer needed to. When people asked her why, she said it was because the earth does not forget you if you keep working at it. Chisholm was in secondary school and doing very well. Her teachers had begun to talk about scholarships. Obiageli was in primary 5 and had decided she wanted to be a chef. She had started helping in the kitchen with a seriousness that was funny to watch in a 9-year-old. She measured her ingredients carefully. She tasted everything before serving. One evening, Obiageli cooked soup for the first time completely on her own. She called her mother and sister to the table with great ceremony. She had prepared ofe nugbu with stockfish, the same soup that Adanna had been cooking on the day the old man knocked on the door. When Adanna tasted it, she was quiet for a moment. "Is it good?" Obiageli asked, watching her mother's face very carefully. "It is very good," Adanna said. "Oh, better than yours?" Adanna laughed. "Do not push your luck, my daughter." Obiageli grinned. It was the widest, most satisfied grin of a child who had done something right. They ate together in the small repaired house at the edge of Ugwoba as the evening came down and the sounds of the village settled around them. Chisholm talked about a book she was reading. Obiageli complained that she had not put enough crayfish. Adanna sat between her daughters and felt the exact weight of the moment. She thought about the night she had counted crayfish and stockfish by lamplight, not knowing how she would get through the next week. She thought about the old man's broken sandal. She thought about Mama Izinwa's shaking hands, placing the beads around her neck and saying, "Carry it well." She thought about Lolo Nwabodo's voice saying, "I am sorry," in that small room. She thought about Chisholm's face when the whole square erupted in applause. She thought about all of it and she held it carefully, the way you hold something that is both heavy and precious at the same time. What this story leaves behind in Ugwoba, they still talk about Adanna, not the way they talk about people in stories that are meant to seem impossible. They talk about her the way people talk about something that happened and that they were part of and that showed them something they needed to see. They talk about how a woman who had almost nothing gave to a stranger from that almost nothing, and how that single act became the root of everything that followed. They talk about it when someone in the village is struggling and people are tempted to look away. They say, remember what happened when this village forgot Adanna for 3 years. Remember what it cost. Remember what it nearly lost. Chief Odumegwu governed Ugwoba with care and was respected for it. But he was the first to say that the most important thing he did was knock on Adanna's door, not as a chief, as a hungry old man with broken sandals and a jute bag. And what she did in response to that knock was the real foundation of everything the village became. Adanna herself did not think of her life as a lesson. She thought of it as her life. She had suffered in it and worked in it and loved in it and was still in it, moving through it one day at a time. But if you asked her what she learned, she would think for a moment and then she would say something simple. She would say, when you have very little, the temptation is to protect that little thing with everything you have. And sometimes that is right, but sometimes the little thing is not really yours to keep. Sometimes it is meant to be passed. And the moment you pass it, something much larger comes back in its place. She would say, the people who are easy to forget are often the ones carrying the most. Pay attention to the person at the edge of the village. She knows things the center of the village has forgotten. She would say, a community is not built from meetings and speeches. It is built from small acts done in private when no one is watching, when there is no reward coming, when it would be very easy to close the door and say, there is nothing here. She would say, the road to Agbani is still long, but you do not have to travel alone. And then she would go back to her work because there was always work to do and she had never been the kind of woman to stop. The end of the story. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel for more content like this. Make sure you drop your comment and share your thoughts with us.